I'm just using a paper plate to colour mix just to keep everything really simple, so I'm not tempted to use any other colours. So I've mixed up the yellow and the red. It's mostly yellow with a pinch of the Winsor Red, painting wet on dry with my size 8 brush. Just literally painting those petals once. I've mixed up a little bit more red and I'm dropping that in to each of the petals here and there, wet into wet. A little bit more yellow here, just working my way round, painting once to keep everything fresh, and then dropping in a little bit of that light yellow orange colour wet into wet with the size 8 brush, even using some water there to dilute the petals to make them lighter. The more water, the lighter the colour, the more paint, the darker the colour. You notice I really sort of load my brush and then drop in the colour, keeping everything really simple. So working on the next flower now, using similar colours, obviously just the yellow and the red, wet on dry, and then dropping in wet into wet and just varying those colours. They're beautiful, simple flowers here, and you can really sort of have a play. You don't have to worry about intricate details here. So it's a great one for beginners, this, keeping everything really simple. Just working my way around there, varying the sort of lights to mid-tones as well. The important thing with watercolour is really load that brush. You want to have that light coming through the paper. You don't want to labour the paint. So I'm painting this flower on the side here. The petals are very thin. I'm just keeping it very, very simple. Those two flowers in the front to the left and in the middle are the stars of the show. Adding a little bit more Winsor Red now, and a pinch of the yellow. Touch more of the yellow. Take your time with colour mixing, and a pinch of that Winsor Blue and a touch more of the yellow. I want to get that sort of warm light brown to begin with in the centre of the flower, painting wet on dry. It may catch some of that yellow there and it may run. Don't worry about that. That's the exciting things about watercolour. So I've added more blue and red, and I'm painting wet on dry, but again it may catch that yellow a little. If it runs too much, just use a paper towel to stop it running. And if you're worried about this, you can let those petals dry and then paint the centres. But what I love about watercolour is this sort of loose aspect where things run a little bit. It just looks more natural. So I'm adding the dark around the outside edge there, stippling, literally painting once again with this darker shade, which is the blue, the red and the yellow, slightly thicker paint. Just working my way around the edge very carefully. So make sure that paint is slightly creamier so it doesn't run onto the yellow. You have more control because the paint is damp and not wet. The wetter it is, the more likely it is to run. And you may want to practice this technique. So I'm painting the centre on the flower that is on the right hand side, which is a little bit obscured there, and just adding a little bit more of that mustardy colour there on the outside edge. That's the yellow with the red with a pinch of blue. The darker colour is the blue and the red, and then a pinch of yellow. You get a lovely dark brown. I've rinsed my brush, taken off the excess water, and I'm wetting the lemon behind the lemon to the left here. I've left a little circle of dry paper for the highlight just to the left there. So I'm actually mixed up a very dilute yellow, and I am painting this wet into wet with my size 8 brush. If you notice, the yellow doesn't run onto that dry area of paper, reserving the highlight. I also dropped a little bit more of the red in the yellow there to make an orangey colour. Just varying the colours here, painting wet into wet with my size 8 brush. Mixing up a slightly creamier yellow there with a pinch of red, just painting around the right hand side there, just warming up the colour and creating a slightly stronger tonal value. And then just painting carefully up to the edge there. Just working my way around on the right hand side there, just finessing the shape of this lemon. Now you can let that dry, or you can carry on by leaving a very sort of small dry gap between that lemon there and this lemon on the right hand side in the front. and that stops the colours running into that lemon, as you saw with the highlight, leaving that dry patch of paper. So I've wet that lemon and I've left a little dry spot for the highlight, and I'm painting wet into wet the sort of diluted yellow colour here, adding a little bit more yellow there, slightly stronger on the right hand side here. The light is coming from the left, if you notice in the photograph. Adding a little bit more of the yellow with a pinch of red now, and painting this wet into wet. And I've just caught the sort of other lemon there, so it's run a little bit. Don't worry if that happens. That's the lovely thing about watercolour. But if you want to avoid that happening, just try to avoid touching the other lemon. So I'm just adding a little bit more colour there on the right underside of that lemon there, using the red and yellow. I'm continuing on now, painting the lemon on the left in the foreground. So mixing up a little bit of yellow with red with a pinch of the blue, a really small pinch of blue. I've taken the excess paint off on my paper towel, so the paint is damp and not wet, and I'm painting damp into damp here, so you get a soft edge, but the paint doesn't travel so much, and it's slightly thicker, so that makes it slightly darker. I'm painting sort of right and left here. On the left hand side it is shaded by that pot, and on the right hand side it's a little bit shaded because the light's not hitting that part of the lemon. So adding a little bit more of that paint right near the edge. So I've added a pinch more of the red, yellow and blue, so a little bit more of each colour makes the colour thicker and eventually makes it darker. So I'm working with medium tonal values here. So I've rinsed my brush, taken the excess water off of my paper towel. I'm just lifting off some of that paint there that's drifted onto the lemon on the right. So this cleans up. So don't worry if sort of things drift. You can always sort of mop them up with a clean damp brush or a paper towel. So I'm just mixing up some creamy red and yellow. I'm just blending here so I don't get any hard edges, and just finessing this lemon behind here. I've just mixed up a little bit of the yellow with a pinch of red. I'm just painting damp into damp, this stronger tonal value just behind the lemon in front to separate them both. So I've mixed up red, blue and a pinch of yellow. I'm painting damp into damp with my size 8 brush. You still get those lovely soft edges, but the paint doesn't travel. So we are working sort of mid to dark tonal values here. As you saw there, I rinsed my brush, took the excess paint off on the paper towel, and I'm blending the outside edge there. So it slightly dilutes that colour, but you don't want to introduce any more moisture. But I just want to have that sort of dark to mid-tone shadow going into the yellow there, into the lemon. I'm adding a little bit more of the red here with a pinch of blue, slightly warmer dark, just to separate that lemon from the background and bring those two lemons from the foreground forward. So that dark against light. And then I'm using a clean damp brush to sort of soften the outside soft edge of that dark there. So it lightens it a little bit so you haven't got that extreme contrast on that lemon behind. So I'm mixing up the yellow and the red with a minute pinch of blue, and I'm stippling here damp into damp. You can do this wet on dry using the size 8 brush to create some of that texture on the lemons there. So it just adds a little bit of detail. You don't have to do too much. Remember, less is more. I'm going to allow my painting to dry. I'm working on the vase and I'm wetting it with my size 8 brush there. Plenty of water, allowing it to soak in. And this is the fun bit. So I am mixing up here some red with a pinch of blue. And I'm going to add some yellow as well. So it makes it kind of a warm, medium brown colour. And it's kind of that sort of lovely brown colour you can see on the pot there. So I'm painting that wet into wet. It doesn't have to be exactly like the photograph. So I've mixed up red, yellow and blue here. Quite a thick, dark colour. And I'm painting this darker brown colour damp into wet with my size 8 brush. Just squiggly marks again creating that look on the pot there. I've decided to kind of change that colour slightly, adding some more yellow to it. So it's a slightly sort of mustardy sort of brown colour. Again, you can sort of vary those colours. I'm just trying to create some different browns, and you can certainly get them by mixing those primary colours in different quantities. So painting them damp into wet, more sort of little spots in the middle and the top part of the vase, varying the sort of size. And it creates that sort of rusty look, and just adding a little bit more at the bottom there with that sort of warmer colour, really trying to finesse the bottom of the vase and the shape of the vase there, curving the bottom, and just adding a little bit more of that sort of mid-brown colour here and there. And I've mixed up the Winsor blue and a pinch of the yellow, and I'm painting pretty much sort of wet into wet, this sort of lovely cool blue colour. And if you want it a little bit darker, just add some more blue. And I've done so here as I paint around the edge of the pot, pushing it into that brown colour there at the bottom. That's the blue, remember, with a pinch of the Winsor yellow, and also working my way around carefully those beautiful petals just above there. So it really pulls them out, the dark against the light, still using that size 8 round brush. And again, as I say, you can vary those colours, adding more blue or a little bit more sort of 50-50 blue and the yellow. But it does create the most stunning colour. So just carefully sort of painting wet into wet here, painting my way down to the right hand side into the middle. And then going back and painting carefully around the petals and the top of the pot there. And I've decided to spatter some of the Winsor blue just here and there, just to create more texture. You don't have to do this, of course. And I'm adding some salt now, and I'm going to sprinkle it onto the damp surface and allow that to dry naturally. So that will really create wonderful sort of textures. Again, you don't have to do this. So I'm lifting off the highlight on the pot. I didn't actually paint round this one. I thought it'd be easier to do it this way. So lifting off with a clean damp brush where I can see the light hitting the left-hand side of the pot. I'm adding some details to the flowers using my size 4 brush. I've mixed up the red and yellow, painting wet on dry, just a few markings just here and there. Remember, less is more, but it just brings them to life. And this flower here behind, I'm even going to give this flower less detail. Rinsing my brush there, I'm just going to soften that a little bit there and push it back. It's just to add a touch of shadow there. And just sort of building up the details. So what I'm doing now is I'm just wet on dry painting that orangey colour just here and there. Rinsing my brush, took the excess water off there, and I'm just sort of softening those marks and just painting the top of the vase here using a dilute blue and yellow here just to lighten the sort of inside top part of the vase. And I'm just painting the stem now, wet on dry, with the yellow and blue, so it's about 50-50, so you've got a sort of mid to light green. Again, you may want to allow your painting to dry because I've had a few bleeds, obviously very keen here, but I painted that damp into damp to the top part of the vase so it kind of disappears into the vase and lifted off those bleeds. I'm just lifting off some more light on the vase there as the paint ran in a little bit because it was damp, so just keep an eye on that. And I'm just spattering some yellow here with a pinch of red around the flowers. And this is to stop me overworking them, but also it kind of adds a little bit of life as well. And I'm going to allow the painting to dry naturally to allow the salt to work. And I am mixing up some red with a pinch of yellow and just painting around the right side of the centre of the flowers onto the petals to add some warmth using my size 8 brush. And it just really makes them look a little bit more 3D in the centre. And just using that size 4 brush now just to add a few darks in the centre, pulling out from the centre into the petals there. So you've got that lovely contrast and detail. So I'm going to work on the lemons next. So I'm adding a little bit of the Winsor blue with a pinch of yellow and red and painting this cast shadow on the left hand side, and then using a clean damp brush to push the water in to that dark to soften the edge there. And I'm just wetting this shadow on the right hand side and mixing up some of the Winsor blue and a pinch of the red, quite dilute, and painting this wet into wet just to build up the shadow. And again, clean damp brush, push that in from the left to the right to get a lovely soft edge. So we're really building up the tonal values here. So I've wet this lemon in the foreground and I mixed up some red with a pinch of yellow and a pinch of blue, so it kind of neutralizes that red. And I'm painting this wet into wet with my size 8 brush on the right hand side, and then again just using lots of water to soften and dilute here and there, adding some yellow on the left hand side, just building up this lemon here, having fun with it as well, keeping it really loose. And just painting here a little bit of sort of stronger yellow with a pinch of red and letting it run down wet into wet. Mixing up here some red into all those colours that I've got previously, but red and blue with a pinch of yellow. And I'm painting this wet into wet on the right hand side where it's slightly darker. So building up the tonal value here, using the 3 primary colours, sort of blending with a clean damp brush here. The shading, using a little bit more of the red with a pinch of blue and yellow, just sort of adding these shadows. Don't be afraid of the dark, they'll bring the light out. Painting wet into wet, and then some creamy yellow and pushing it into that red orange to soften the edge and sort of to really build up the form on the lemon here. Adding a little bit more of the red orange on the right hand side, pretty much damp into damp here, and then softening with a clean wet brush here and there. And I've mixed up the red and yellow with a pinch of blue, and I'm painting damp into damp, some of this shading but also some of the texture here and there, using my size 8 brush. And again, remember, less is more. It's amazing how many different colours you can get. So just adding some of the detail, almost wet on dry there at the front of the lemon, and just adding some of the shading, some of the details. Pretty much in some areas the painting has dried, so I'm working wet on dry, but other areas it's still damp, so I'm just building up some texture and details here, working damp into damp. The sort of shadow parts are on the right hand side and at the bottom, and that's where I'm working, trying to keep the center of the lemons light and on the left hand side and above. So just working my way around here, working damp into damp, and I thought it'd be quite nice just to add a few more markings on that lemon behind to balance it out. I'm painting the foreground, the table surface here, and I haven't actually dried the lemons. You can if you want to, but I quite like the fact that the colour will run down because there's some reflection there. So I've wet it with the size 8 brush with clean water, and I'm starting off with a mixture of the red and yellow, and just to paint some lovely kind of reflection. I'm kind of doing my own interpretation. So mixing up here the yellow and the blue, and I'm painting this wet into wet, and then I'm using a clean wet brush to sort of blend and soften and pulling that paint into the yellow as well, and softening the yellow on the right hand side. And just using a little bit more of that Winsor blue with a pinch of yellow, pulling that into the reflection there, and a little bit of the orange as well, red orange, and sort of painting reflection of the lemons there, sort of damp into damp or wet into wet just underneath the lemons, using a little bit of the blue. You notice I'm tilting. I want to keep it quite sort of atmospheric here and quite abstract. The table surface itself is not really that interesting. I thought this would make it a little bit more exciting. So I've mixed up the red and blue together here, and I'm painting sort of damp into wet, allowing the paint to run down, using my Spritzer bottle to soften everything there. And I'm using my size 8 brush, painting wet on dry, mostly the Winsor blue with a pinch of yellow, carefully painting around the lemons and then softening and blending with a clean wet brush. adding a little bit of the red mixed with the blue and yellow here. So it's quite a neutral colour background. It's just to add some shading behind the lemons to bring them out, to bring them forward. Carefully sort of painting up to the lemons and then spritzing here with a spritzer bottle, allowing the colours to all run down here. And then finishing off with a spatter of red and yellow. And I'm going to allow the painting to dry. What I'm doing now is I'm adding some shadows underneath the pot using the Winsor blue with a pinch of the red and yellow, carefully painting around using my size 8 round brush. And I'm using a clean damp brush now to soften that outside hard edge there, so it looks like shadow. And you can see how those lovely colours underneath sort of glow through, but it adds interest. So I'm blending here and I'm going to paint a cast shadow to the right hand side here using the red and the blue. And just painting right up close to the lemon there, allowing that colour to run into the shadow underneath. And it just sort of sits them on the table there. Using a little bit more of that dark here under the pot. Damp into damp there, and then blending with a clean wet brush just to bring that colour down and softening that cast shadow there as well. And I'm painting the top of the pot here using the red with the Winsor blue, wet on dry, and I'm using a clean sort of damp brush just to blend and soften that so it looks like a bit of shadow inside of the pot. And I'm going to allow my painting to dry once more. I'm finishing off with some shadows here, mixing up the blue, the red with a pinch of yellow on the lemon here behind, and then blending the soft outside edge, and then painting a little bit of cast shadow here on the pot from the lemon in front using that colour, and then softening and blending with a clean damp brush, and then just spattering the pot there with a little bit of blue and yellow mix. And here is my finished painting. I really hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. If you'd like to support the content that I create here on YouTube, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? You will get access to my exclusive weekly tutorials and downloadable outline sketches, and you can cancel anytime. Thank you so much for watching. Happy painting. Bye for now.